brief introduction.
Oh, that's perfect.
And talk about that. Because we're a small group, I think you can probably just raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Pardeep's gonna talk for about 45 minutes. And then after that, we'll be open to questions and answers. So let me just say a brief introduction. I think some of you have already seen this, but in case you haven't, let me just read to you a little bit about Pardeep's background. A native of Punjab, India, Pardeep grew up in Milwaukee and received his BA at Marquette University and an MS at Alverno College. As a former police officer and educator in the inner city of Milwaukee, Pardeep understands the difficulty facing our communities. Today, as a therapist, his specialization is in holistic trauma-informed treatment with survivors of assault, abuse, and acts of violence. Both in his practice and out, Pardeep's passion remains one of healing and recovery. As a first-generation immigrant, Pardeep's approach to dual cultural identity issues create constructive cultural agility and dialogue to bridge gaps between diverse communities. Pardeep is the author of the book, The Gifts of Wounds, which is a great book. I just reread parts of it this morning, which he wrote in 2012. He also founded, along with Arno, his skinhead friend, no longer Skinfred, they Serve to Unite, an organization that engages communities in local and global peacemaking by utilizing service learning, artistic response, and global engagement to address violence, conflict, radicalization, and trauma-informed lenses. Pardeep is also the executive director of the Greater Milwaukee Interfaith and of the, I've got a black here, the Zeidler Group. So Pardeep, thank you for being with us this morning. We really appreciate it, particularly at this time in our history. Your words, your witness have an awful lot to say. So
Right,
the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Bishop. And thank you, everyone. I appreciate and am grateful to be on the service with you today, and was grateful to be part of the service or to attend the service earlier. So I will be referring back to the service, and I just again I want to thank Christ Church. I want to thank part of the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee. For those that don't know, kind of the work that we do, we 51 years we have been working on interfaith relations between different judicatories. We have been working on advocacy. We have membership with mainline Protestants, Roman Catholics, the Jewish community, Muslim community, Buddhists, Baha'is, Hindus, Latter-day Saints, Moravian, Pentecostal, Sikhs, Unitarian, Universalists, and our community can grow and foster that interfaith partnership and collaborations. Our chair is the chair of the Interfaith Conference is the Reverend David Simmons, who is the rector at Saint Matthias Episcopal Church. One of the people that has a huge part in it has been Bishop Miller, and again, as the bishop said, we welcome Bishop Lee. We are looking and just speaking at you, and so I want to make sure that we get to questions.
Ed, you're muted.
Oh, I am muted?
Oh, no, Ed was muted. Ed, were you trying to say something?
I was trying to say that in my computer, Pardeep, your sound was coming in and out. Maybe it was just my computer.
Oh, got it. Okay. All right. So I'll be
Mine
mindful.
too.
On yours as well? Okay. I am going to play a short little video, and this will kind of explain to you and maybe put us into a place where, so I'm trying to play this video that goes back a little bit for, a few years back, but has a lot of relevancy right now and can explain a lot of things faster than I can explain it, and then we can get right in. On your end, if you can mute yourself just for right now, and then we'll have a discussion as we go forward. Can everyone see this?
Yeah.
And Nations, well, what they do is, it's kind of a good news type of service. They do a great job going in depth. And so this video was, again, this was created a while back before I was the director of the Interfaith conference. So it's going to date on that just a little bit. Can everyone hear this?
Can't hear the
No,
sound.
I don't hear.
No sound?
No sound.
No sound.
Let me go back just a little bit. I'm going to take my video. Let's go. Can you hear now?
Nope.
No.
I
Did
start
you-
squad car flying by us. The squad car pulls up in front, like tapes it off real quick, windows down, thinking to myself, like literally thinking to myself, this is a beautiful morning. Life seemed, it was just great. I start to see squad cars flying by us. The squad car pulls up in front. Happened at the temple.
Police say the shooting began around 10:30 Sunday morning as many inside the Sikh temple were gathering for worship. Witnesses said the first shots came outside, inside mayhem.
I felt anger. But then I felt this sense of relief that like I wasn't involved in that. I also felt this incredible sense of guilt. For the past 5.5 years, I've continued to wrestle with those two feelings, survivor's guilt and survivor's relief. I am just appreciative to live this life, but I also have this guilt of I'm not doing enough. You guys all hear that? When we breathe in suffering and we breathe out healing.
Serve to Unite was founded in response to the August 5th, 2012 Sikh temple shooting. It was a means for the Sikh community to transform this atrocity into something inspirational that would bring people together from that day forward.
Was initially formed to bring about an awareness of the Sikh community, but then we knew that it was going to morph into something much bigger than that to really address communal healing for all communities.
Today, Serve to Unite works with young people from second grade through college. We do arts-driven service learning and global engagement. We also organize a 6K run every year to raise money for scholarships for Sikh young people in honor of the Sikh victims of the Sikh temple shooting. And recently, Pardeep and I have started working with small towns and municipalities, trying to help them become comfortable with demographic change as populations are changing.
We're weaving in our parts of ourselves into a map of Milwaukee to end the segregation, to bring everybody together.
There's places where people are just not as unified, and if we have a chance to change that, we should definitely do it. Especially with Milwaukee being like that, we should do as much as we can.
So this is the bullet hole that was left by the shooter as he was trying to shoot into the women that were here. He was just shooting from back here. And then Dad's final resting place was in this room.
Oh, this is the Sikh fellow. Yeah.
And he gets out here, and as these responding officers are coming to the scene, they engage in a firefight with Wade Page. And Wade Page takes his own life. The shooter killed himself. There was not much explanation from law enforcement. So I said, let me reach out to Arnold and really find out why white supremacists do these things. In a selfish kind of way, I also wanted someone to raise their hand and say, you know what, I'm responsible for this.
In 1987, me and a few friends of mine started a white power skinhead gang in Milwaukee. We started our own white power skinhead band also. And our band was very much a rallying point for like every pissed off white kid in Wisconsin.
We must secure the existence of our race for the future of white children.
We stoked their anger and their angst, and we blamed it on Jewish people. We blamed it on people of color. We blamed it on gay people. We later got involved in the early stages of what today is known as Hammerskin Nation, and that's the largest organized white power skinhead group on the planet Earth. So nowadays, when violence is perpetrated by this group, I feel a great deal of responsibility. And speaking of which, Wade Michael Page, the man who murdered Pardeep's father and 5 other people, was a member of that group.
I know, it's one of their specialties.
About an inner conversation where I'm saying, where do you get off thinking that you're going to go waltzing off into the sunset after all of the people you hurt, after all of the harm you've done? I left the movement in 1994. On paper, we couldn't have been more different, but when we sat down and talked, we saw how much we had in common, and it hit us at that point, like, we need to work together. We got to do something together to basically get this message out to the world, and the more people we can help understand this, the better off we're all going to be.
Oh yeah, the murals. We had a group of people who painted murals on the walls in our school, and they had positive messages and things to bring the community together. We've also been doing
people of the high school age, that they're the next generation. So it's important to me for them to have a good community for themselves, which will bring a better community for the younger generation and for generations to come.
If we're going to be the antidote for what's wrong with our society, we really got to focus on what's right. In my experience, what's right is the truth that human beings have more in common than different.
The more voids that a child has, the more vulnerabilities. So filling those voids with sort of a wraparound program, it takes a village to raise a child. And somehow, some way, we step back from that saying. But I think that saying is more true now than ever. It takes a village to really nurture a child.
To have amazing people in my life like Pardeep Kaleka, who have taught me so much and who love me and I love them. Pretty much every day I am literally in this state of joy and gratitude. That's what life's all about.
Just a second while I plug in. That's been basically my life for the past nine years. One of my best friends is a former white supremacist who started the same organization that the shooter belonged to in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The gang's called the Hammerskin Nation. It is and has become the most violent neo-Nazi skinhead organization in the world. And a lot of their, when they came up from Chicago to Milwaukee, a lot of their the vulnerabilities of white boys around that time really lent themselves to recruitment efforts. Today is, I'm sorry to be redundant, but can everybody hear me? Okay, perfect. Today is February 14th. It is, and whenever I see the 14th, not that I'm a numerologist or anything like that, and but there's certain numbers that really ring out, and 14 is one of them. And I can't go on with this talk without discussing kind of the number 14. And when I first saw the shooter, his name was Wade Michael Page, and I say it with, oftentimes I've gotten, well, Pardeep, why do you say his name? And then I say his name because he was once a young man, a young boy, a young child, just like anybody else. We can't, we can vilify the ideology, we can vilify even the thing that they do, but we can't sit in a place where we just vilify people. Because I mean, what can we do with vilifying people except turn them into the monsters that they want to present that they are? This just child was like any other child that grew up in this country and absorbed a lot of the social ills, embodied them, and then thought that it was his right to take that out on other people. He, when we go back to himself, he had the number 14 tattooed on his shoulder. And one of my first questions that I asked Arnold, because 14, as I was growing up, I played a lot of sports, and when you play a lot of sports, oftentimes you will get the same number over and over and over again. And when I played baseball, I got the number 14. When I played basketball, I got the number 14. When I played football, I was given the number 14. So I thought it kind of haunting that I saw this number 14 tattooed, in very, very visible on his left-hand shoulder. And thought to myself, that's one of the first questions that I'm going to ask Arnold. What does the number 14 mean? And today's February 14th. But 14, Arnold told me, was a mantra. And it is the mantra of almost every white supremacist organization, whether they are, whether they call themselves patriot groups, sovereign citizens, neo-Nazis, Klan. There is an element of this mantra that exists, not to the full extent of believing it, but within all of that, and this mantra was coined by a person named David Lane. David Lane was a leader of another organization called The Order. When he coined this, lots of other organizations started to take this up. And so the mantra reads as, "We shall ensure the existence of our race and a future for white children." That is found on the manifestos, that is found on the propaganda, the recruitment, and really it's. So some people will say number 14 stands for the 14th letter, which is HHH, meaning Hail Hitler. So it talks about that. But the further you go down the rabbit hole of what white supremacy and white supremacist, and I'm not talking about people that might be just kind of sympathetic to it. I'm talking about the affiliated, patched members of these organizations believe in that mantra. And in their sort of order of people that they're against, obviously they will say they're against the Jewish community. They're against what they call the mud people, meaning people who are not white. But the top of their list are what they call race traitors. And that is white people who are not fighting for a white nationalist state, people who go against their own cause. And so I am grateful, I'm thankful that the allyship, the partnership that we take on as we go forward. And as much as it is a burden for me to have to play this video and to have to relive all of that, I do so because I know that there's 7 people who died that day. And I know that this promise cannot be fulfilled. And this promise is a spiritual promise. And it's a spiritual promise between, and I know that everyone on this call understands that it's not just a covenant that we have with this nation, or this is a covenant that we have with our relationship to God. This is a spiritual covenant. This is a promise. This is something that we have to dig in deep and make sure we have those conversations. The bishop, I was taken back with the words of just and as far as Elijah and Elisha, and kind of the sort of, I felt like the burden that was being put upon the younger, and the younger always kind of thinking about, do I have enough wisdom to be able to do what I need to do, almost kind of renouncing what that felt like and looked like. And I and thinking about letting me have a double portion of that spirit. Sometimes the double portion of that spirit comes in ways that we would not want to bestow upon anybody. Growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I was 6 years old when I moved here. The son of just farmers. My parents were both. My mom had graduated from 5th grade. My dad, he was a farmer through and through, but a very spiritual person. And so his legacy was really that he wanted to create a welcoming environment for other Sikhs to be able to come to. And before he passed, he was able to do that by building the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin. He put a lot of his own property on the line. My parents spent sometimes 7 days a week at that temple. And oftentimes it didn't make sense to me. Oftentimes I had sort of a difficult, sometimes even contentious relationship with the temple itself, with the scriptures, with religion, with, sometimes even with God. And oftentimes I would, I think, spent time doubting, spent time renouncing, spent time just kind of being critical. And lo and behold, August 5th taught me so many different things. But one of the things it taught me was really, God is big enough to take my doubts. God is big enough for me to curse God and be upset at God, and for God to still show up in so many different ways. And the other thing he taught me was really what I need to be doing going forward. And that, and I believe it was Elisha who said, who needed the reassurance. I don't want to, but needing that reassurance that God will never leave, that something is always going to be there. I think for me, losing somebody like my father, and for this, we call it the Sangit, which is another name that is synonymous with congregation. But losing your leader and sort of spiritual leader, my dad was very, very much a spiritual person, where he spoke prophetically wherever he went. Oftentimes you wouldn't get a reply of a simple reply back, because he would recite a scripture, and he was well taught in that, from the point that when he was in India, they used to call him by a name, a Gyani, which is kind of a scholar. And he wasn't a well-taught man in a lot of different things, but as far as the text and the scriptures and the history and all of that, he was well taught. So he spoke a language that he knew. And so oftentimes people go to him and say, hey, I'm having an issue with, and instead of giving the advice that probably they wanted to hear right there in that moment, he would oftentimes speak in prophetic tone of the scriptures. So that's the type of person he was. So losing somebody like that and having to step up, I sat in this difficult space of, I couldn't really grieve on like myself, because I had a responsibility. I had a responsibility to the new incoming immigrants. 6 other families' lives were devastated that day. Most of them did not speak English, were new incoming immigrants. A lot of the congregation at the Sikh Temple in Oak Creek were very much the very new incoming immigrants. It's different from different temples and different places. The one in Brookfield, the Sikh Temple in Brookfield, those are maybe people that have been established within the community a bit longer. So I felt the responsibility to have to speak up for them, and tell people that, we are not the sum of what happens to us, but we are the sum of how we reply and how we respond, and the entire community is. So I not only had a responsibility to the internal community, I had a responsibility to the external community too. As I saw people from different faiths and religions and walks of life gather outside that Gurdwara that day, and to go back, it has become, sadly, it's become common to see incidents like this happen. But at that time, this was not very common. This was, one of the deadliest hate crimes committed by an affiliated white supremacist in nearly 50 years. So, unfortunately, after that, this became much more common because it became much more of a copycat effect to really target communities of faith. But at that time, when I went outside the temple, you saw people of different religions, faiths, and one of the things that struck me that day and still strikes me as just a beautiful example and walking of faith is that I think people had choices, and people still do have choices, and that choice, it's a Sunday. People who are just getting out of their own worship, and they had a choice to either go home or they could have stopped there. And so many people elected to just stop there, not knowing who these people were. To them, it really was the stranger, right? And how much do we speak about the stranger in the scriptures, right? And these folks, I was, and I know that it was not lost in our community, is that I saw people from different walks of life. They couldn't communicate with one another, verbally, but they could just show up and they could walk their faith. And that's what they did. That's what they did that day. And within our grief, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, it took this to bring people together. And I can't help but to have a feeling like that even now in 2021. And I don't talk about politics in ways that, I really am pretty much a middle of the line moderate. Whoever's in front of me, if it's a Democrat, I'm going to hold them responsible. If it's a Republican, I'm going to hold them responsible, because I think that's just the way. I'm not going to talk about the other side. But at the same time, I think there was that feeling over the past 4 years, especially, to kind of say, okay, maybe we needed to see this. Maybe this pandemic has shook something within us that will make us create the society we probably should have created before. Maybe the divisiveness that we actually exist in right now are leftovers from the divisive world we have created. Maybe we're just in the process of healing, and we needed to see it in front of our eyes for us to kind of say, hey, you know what? This is really an issue. And if we don't really embody that faith, if we don't, as the bishop said, what will it take for us to find that divine voice? And that's the question we asked at the sermon earlier. What will it take us to find that divine voice? For me, and I don't think that it's the same for everyone, it took a shooting. Sadly, it took a shooting, and it took me seeing it and saying, okay, I am going to dedicate the rest of my life to healing these wounds. I know what I have to do. I have, we were discussing earlier, but we stay in Shorewood, and I have 4 beautiful children. I've been blessed with a wonderful life. And I think that all of us as parents, grandparents, and clergy, and as reverends, as bishops, as all of us have this promise that we must engage in. And the promise is really, how do we leave the world better than the one that we found? How do we ensure that we do what we can when we can for those that we can? And for I think for us, it was really okay. We understand our responsibility. I would love to say that everyone in the congregation and everyone in our Sangat woke up that day and understood their responsibility. But I have to understand that people are in different parts of their path and life, and they have, oftentimes one of the deepest responsibilities is one that we have to ourselves, one that we have to our own personal healing. And there's still people that now are still healing, are still kind of waking up to what that looks like, what that feels like. They're not able to correlate what happened on August 5th by an openly affiliated white supremacist and the politics of the time. Sadly, there's people in our congregation, and I've gotten the emails from people saying, how can people from the Sikh temple vote for a certain political party? People are just on different paths, and it takes all of us to become teachers, and it takes all of us to be students. And that relationship is always there. I am grateful for being able to learn from you all, and from the lesson that you give to the world. And with that said, I am going to stop talking, and I am going to open it up for any questions that you have. Please do not feel that there is any such thing as a bad question. I've gotten the question before, and I'll say even as intimate. So, at the time the shooting happened, my daughter forgot a notebook at the house. And it was only because we turned around and went to the house that we were about 10 minutes late to the shooting. Otherwise, we would have been in the shooting ourselves. We were that close and that proximal to the shooting. So that just sort of divine intervention of her being forgetful about a notebook, and me going back and really prioritizing my child, right? And we think about how much we need to prioritize our children. Prioritizing my child is what saved our life, or what kept us out of the shooting at that time. So I've gotten the question before of, what if it was your daughter that was shot and killed? Would you still be able to be the same person now? And so I encourage you to ask with that level of intention of whatever is on your heart. Just go ahead and ask it. And Bishop, maybe you can see everyone.
Yeah, I can't see everybody at the same time, but raise your hand if you have a question. Let me just ask a question while we're waiting
Sure.
to come on board. In your book, you talk about, which is very autobiographical, both you and Arno, the dialogue that goes back and forth. It was enlightening to hear your history before and after the shooting. But you talk about how hurt people hurt people. And you talk about how to heal wounds, that a strategy was to tell the story of your woundedness. And somehow that gave a common base and allowed some gentle, loving, and forgiveness to take place. Here in Milwaukee, we're faced with a lot of problems and issues. As a former policeman, you know that better than any of us. What is it that we can do, especially those of us living out in the northern suburbs? What can we do to help alleviate some of the misunderstandings and some of the polarities that exist?
Yeah, that's a great question. And each one of us, I once had a mom raise her hand, and oftentimes I think the danger of something like this happening is that we make it too big. And I say that to say this. This was a parent who was asking a question about what can she do as a parent, and she was there with her child sitting next to, and I'm like, you're doing it right now. You have your child there, and you're raising consciousness, and you are getting into the nitty-gritty of this feeling work, as hard and difficult as it may be. So what we can all kind of do is to raise consciousness. And raising consciousness is not just about education, but it's about feeling work too. And when we can feel, I cold-heartedly believe that when we can feel, we can heal. And if we don't, we won't. It's not just exactly that simple, but each one of you has circles that Pardeep will never ever get to. And I think that Arnold, learning this from Arnold and I have been doing de-radicalization work for a long time. It's some of the work that's not as advertised, meaning that we don't put it out there. But sometimes you'll have a child who is getting into a certain kind of, a lot of times lately it's been political ideology, but just ideology that's taking them down the rabbit hole of becoming isolationist, of becoming more violent, and a lot of times that within all of that, there's a lot of vulnerabilities around just mental health. But when I say mental health, I really mean spiritual health. So there's a lot of that around. And I let parents know, I let people know, I'm like, there's somebody that right now that is vulnerable to going down that rabbit hole. And as hard as it is, you have to kind of, each one, reach one, teach one. Each one of us can reach somebody that somebody else cannot. And we all have responsibility. With that said, I know that sometimes having those difficult conversations with people that don't agree with you, or people that are not even trying to hear you, or even sometimes are outright violent towards you, is not an easy thing to do. When you go down a rabbit hole with somebody, it's kind of like going down a tube, right? And you want to go down that tube, and you want to get them and pick them up and then bring them back up. Sometimes when we're trying to bring them back up, they're fighting us, right? You're trying to save somebody who doesn't want to be saved, or sometimes doesn't even know that they have an issue or a problem. And so I say, reach out to people within your life that you can be there for them, listen to them. Listening doesn't mean just, condoning, but try to raise consciousness every once in a while, ask a question here and there. So what do you think? Why do you think that? And know that it's going to have an effect on you too. Know that you're not going to probably come out of that like that place the same way. You're going to come out fatigued. So you are also going to need people in your life that you can come back to and say, hey, I need you. I need to not have to solve a problem right now. I need to just be me. And I need you to tell me that the world is going to be okay. I was in Newtown, Connecticut one time, and I was in Newtown, and what it made me remember this story. I remember like even having like this discussion. I was in Newtown and I was doing a conversation with somebody who had lost their child, and I think that is, for me as a parent and for many parents, that is about as bad as it gets, to lose a 7-year-old and have to imagine that somebody walked into school one day and shot and killed children. And I want to intentionally say it in this way, because sometimes we need to just hear the truth. This person intentionally shot children who were running away from them, children who were screaming. And these parents had to live with that truth. Talking to these folks, and I've been to mass shooting after mass shooting, East Coast to West Coast. But Newtown was probably as bad as it gets. And I remember finishing up the conversation, and I remember telling Arnold was still there, and I had a rental car. And I got on the road, and it was kind of rainy that night. Newtown, Connecticut, for those that have never been there, doesn't have like McDonald's or any commercial spots. It's all kind of like the small, quaint town, but sometimes it's quiet. It's almost haunting. It almost feels like in your bones. It rained the entire time we were there. This was 3 days, and it felt like there was like God was crying. It really felt like God was crying. And I'm like, Arnold, I got to get out of here. And as soon as I finished the talk, I got in the car and I went to go stay at a hotel near the airport. And I knew I was going to get on a flight the next morning. And part of me was like, I just got to get out of here. To me, it was just the deepest wound. And on the way back to the airport, my car, and this is a brand new rental car, goes entirely flat. The tire just punctures out. First time that's ever happened. And I pull to the side and I get out and I ride the car up off the freeway ramp and get to a gas station and change the tire and put the dummy tire on. And I continue on my way. And there's something happening that's saying, you know what, you're running from your responsibilities. You're running from what you need to do. And which is for me, the best part is sometimes the worst part, right? The best part is being able to listen to people's pains, but sometimes it's something that's, you can't shake it off. And as I got to Milwaukee, I got back to Milwaukee and I got around my family. It was just one of those things that I couldn't shake off. And then what I found out later was the same guy that I was doing the presentation, who had lost his daughter. He had committed suicide. A year later, he commits suicide, and he commits suicide in the state capitol. And he left a note. I don't know what the note said. It was never released what he said on there. But part of it is that certain like people are able to do some of these things and do it because they sit in that middle place of, I could accept that my father, who was an elder, was one of the people who was taken, so I need to continue on as a son. But there's other people who can't. And I know this is a long-winded way of answering that question, Bishop, but I think what we can do is just kind of be there for people within our lives and realize that that they're hurting. It's a tough thing to understand. It's not easy, because when somebody is a certain kind of way towards you, what you want to believe is that they're just evil, that there's just embodied badness, wickedness. But truer is that they are hurting, and hurt people do hurt other people.
Thank you. Thank you. Other questions? Seth.
Pardeep, so grateful that you are among us today. I'm the rector of Christ Church, and I've heard you speak on a couple of occasions, but I don't think that we've ever personally met. But thank you for sharing your story. Hearing you made me remember going to that big public event in Oak Creek, in which the whole community was invited, and I went to represent Christ Church, and the energy in that space, like the number of people, and then that sense that that you all wanted to be a community that fostered healing over finger pointing and revenge was just so palpable. I appreciate you talking about you growing up in the temple as sort of a pastor's kid, and kind of the ways that, the joys and challenges of that. My question is, well, one more conditional statement. We Christians, because we're the dominant group, we often don't know very much about other religions in our community. And so my question is, as you've been formed in the Sikh religion, what's in Sikhism that helps you take this path of forgiveness, that helps you take this path of love, that helps you take this path of healing? Are there scriptures? Are there saints? Are there, your fathers? It sounds like your father was sort of a living saint in some way. So, what is it about your religion that helps you take this path?
Yeah, that's a deep question, and I'll try to keep it quick. But what we can, as my dad, he had a lot of responsibilities, and part of the responsibilities was to the world and our congregation and our Sangat, and then obviously his responsibilities as a father. But sometimes I know that within the book, as we were doing it, they're like, "Can we paint your dad in this picture?" I'm like, I want to paint my dad in an honest light that says, you know what, he was challenged, and he was challenged between his personal responsibilities and his communal responsibilities, and oftentimes his communal responsibilities, and you could probably understand this, took higher priority than his parental responsibilities. Not that he was a bad parent, but he just, there was a lot of things. And I think now that I kind of understand that world, I empathize with him more, because I'm like, I'm fatigued. I'm like, at the end of the day, I almost don't have the emotional bandwidth for my family, and they have to be understanding. So over the past couple of years, it's been really about taking care of yourself and showing up for your family, showing up for your communities, just yourself, really. And so, yeah, the Sikhism was formed, 500 years ago, but it came from a long line of um, sort of Dharma teachings. And when I say that, some people, some Sikhs get mad because this was a faith that formed on its own. But but I asked them, like, historically, how, like, that Sikhism and Hindus came first, and Muslims were around, and then other people were around, and then we came about 500 years ago. Nanak, who was considered to be the founder of Sikhism, but when I say that, there was a lot of prophets during that time, and this was around 1469, 1500, that were really revolutionizing. And I mean, this was during the time of Luther, during the time of the sort of like, and what was happening in India was there was a lot of what we would call the caste system. And Nanak found the caste system really just horrible. And he oftentimes questioned and said, why is it that we as an upper caste get to look at the lowest caste and not touch them, not help them? So what he was doing at that time was really trying to rid ourselves of not only just the caste system itself and the policies around it, but the spiritual caste system in our mind. And so he started to teach around equality and equity and social justice. And so Sikhism later on would come out and say, okay, we're going to use the same names for men and women. So Pardeep can be a gender neutral name. Every Sikh name became gender neutral because they said men were the same as women and women were the same as men. Not that they were the same biologically, but needed to have the same respect and reverence from God. And so all of that was happening, and I think all of that became part of the teachings. The book itself, the scripture itself, was called the Guru Granth, and the Guru Granth was written mainly by nine of the first 10 gurus. The last guru would be the last living guru, and what happened to him was they were in a fight against the Muslims in that time of India, and all 4 of his children were killed. And then he would be killed, and then his mother was killed, and his father was killed. So all of the lineage pretty much was done. And what he said was, okay, you might be able to kill a person, but you cannot kill the word. And the word is truth. The word is, and so his like what he wanted to put forward was really that, and the spiritual teachings of Sikhi start off with the word one. And the foundational stone of Sikhi is one. And he basically started to say, first and foremost, if you don't understand the foundational stone of oneness, and that God is a God of all and everything in the universe, don't even read the rest of the scripture. and so it was like that rebellious of a thing. But the language itself is just kind of this poetic relationship to God. It's almost as if like you're having this conversation. And sometimes it's like other poets like Kabir, and there's Muslim poets, there's Hindu poets, there's Sikh poets. At that time in India, when that was happening, there wasn't a lot of religious differences that really played a role until later on, until like kind of like colonization started to happen, and people started to be like, well, you should really hate this person because they're Hindu, or you should hate this person because they're Christian, or you should hate this person because they're, and this divide and conquer sort of mentality started to become part of India. And so yeah, just in like the biggest part of the scripture is really just that fight for oneness and equality. And Sikhi took a lot of teachings from, not that they took, but was influenced. They were influenced by a lot of teachings from both Hindus, Muslims, and then obviously for now, India is going through its difficulties with the farmers, and where India is kind of becoming a nationalist state, and really ruled by the Hindus. But we we really didn't have that in the past. I mean, a lot of people, don't get me wrong. There's been tension, but for the large part, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Baha'is, we really did have a lot of religious pluralism.
Greg, you had a question before.
Yeah, I have two questions. First of all, isn't the Sikh, I think of the temples, they'll feed people
Mhm.
and they feed them until they're all gone. I think there's a golden temple in India. Is that correct?
You're exactly correct. Yep. The Golden Temple is in a place called Amritsar, and a big part of the Sikh faith is something called langar. And langar was, so remember, like Nanak was kind of deliberate in saying, I want to see equality. He basically said if people can eat at the same level, then they can see God within one another. Yeah.
They can tell, I don't know how many people know about that, but they can feed thousands at a time.
Thousands, yeah. Yeah, there's a in India, the Golden Temple, some days when you get a lot of you get like a holy worship day, you can feed almost 500,000 people. And yeah, that's very common for like different langars all across the world. The fifth guru, what was happening at the time, again, there's like and in India, I should say this too. Sometimes you'll see and say people in castes, and the upper caste is kind of the richer people, right? Or the more wealthy. In India, because it's such a like almost like a god reverent place, the highest caste was actually the Brahmins and the Hindus, who were the highest caste, and they were seen as those that connected to God. And so when Nanak was going through this, he saw a lot of them misusing their influence and their power. And so what he wanted to do was kind of like, okay, I need you to see yourself in the common person. I can't have you do that. And so when he would serve this langar, this food, he would make them sit at the same level. Well, a lot of those folks didn't want to sit at the same level as what they called the untouchable caste. And so what they would do is say, okay, if you bring me a kind of a little mat or something like that, I'll sit a little bit higher than this person. And he basically, and the fifth guru was like, no, we're all going to sit at the same level. You're going to sit at the same level as that person. And there was a bunch of things that he did, or that they did, to kind of make that deliberate. But I think langar was a huge part of yeah, like, and you're like the higher caste is going to serve the lower caste. And then people started to kind of have an issue with that and a problem with it. People would come up to Nanak and say, okay, Nanak, like, I can't put food into this, like, into this person's mouth, because there's also something called reincarnation. They said if you touch the person of the lowest caste, then the next lifetime you would be born as that same caste.
Oh.
So it was that ingrained into the spiritual fabric of a human being in India, that if you touch a person, and so they would come to Nanak and say, Nanak, I can't put food into this homeless person, or this person that really needs its mouth. And Nanak would say, and so he wrote a scripture around, that's my mouth. That's God's mouth. That's not a homeless person. That's not a untouchable. You haven't looked at this person as a sentient being of God. Then. And if you don't see God in all, you don't see God at all.
I think in YouTube, you can look up the Golden Temple. It is absolutely unbelievable. But the other question was, how can I get that video that you first showed? Because it was broken up a little bit. And I'd like to know.
I can share it with the bishop. Bishop, can I share it with you? And you
with Michael?
Yep. No,
with Bishop Ed. Ed will get it to you, Vicki.
Okay, thank you.
I think Greg had a question first, and then Helen.
Thank you. And Pardeep, it is a real pleasure to meet you. I've kind of, as you've gotten involved with the Interfaith Conference and leading that in the Zeidler Center, it's very exciting what you're doing in our community, and even before that. My question is about your friend and your partner in the organization that you guys formed, Serve to Unite. When you reached out to him, you were reaching out to him because he was a white supremacist. Where was he in his journey of turning away from his past, his white supremacy, when you first met him? And was he in transition? Had he already, come away from it? Or did, as you began to become friends with him, did that change his heart as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question, Greg. And so the person's name that Greg is talking about is Arno Michaelis. And Arno, at that point, when I reached out to him in 2012, he had denounced the movement. It's called the movement. So he had denounced the movement, but he was very early on in his stage of kind of recovery. And I would say recovery within ideological movements, when you get that far in, is likened to drug abuse. And what, he would definitely be somebody that you should, he'll talk about it within that way. But when we first met, I was looking for an explanation. And when we think about that, a lot of times we think that explanations will justify and say, okay, now I'm good. Now I'm fine. Now I can go on with my life. That's what I thought, Greg. I thought if I just had an explanation, the shooter killed 7 people and then killed himself. 8 people dead that day, along with the explanation. So there was a feeling of I have to do this community work, but I'm agitated. There's this internal agitation that if I could have an answer, or if I could have answers, then I wouldn't be so internally agitated. One thing I want to say is, like, sometimes that internal agitation is not such a bad thing. Sometimes guilt is actually a healthy thing. The proper amount of agitation, guilt, anger, all of these things are fine. But I wanted to get rid of it any which way. So I reached out to this person. And when I met him, we sat down for dinner, and really the first time that we met, I was thinking to myself, what am I going to say? And he will very much say, yeah, I didn't know. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know if sorry was going to be good enough. He didn't know, because he kind of took responsibility. He's the one that started that same organization, right? So sometimes when we don't do enough to counteract what we've put out into the world, there's a healthy sense of guilt with that. So we got to go back and say, okay, you know what? I need to create a healthier relationship to whatever I did in the past. And he was very much wrestling with that. When we sat down, I realized how much he was going through and how much he was struggling. And we sat there, we both cried. We both talked about our daughters. We talked about our fathers. We talked about our relationship to America. We just sat there as just 2 grown men having a conversation. And what I wanted and what I got was 2 different things. And I think this is true for a lot of different people. We think that what we need is explanations, but what we truly need is experiences. And that experience of brotherhood, of empathy, of understanding, of explanations attached to the way that you feel is what I've gotten. And over time, God puts into your life sometimes not what you want, but what you need. And I've called him back and I said, as a clinician, you have been the most amazing brother. You have been the most amazing friend. Today, I'll leave him alone to watch my kids, my children. He will babysit by himself. But what I've really gained is a person to help me heal and become whole and return back to my family and return back to communities. So with that said, I think sometimes people that help us grow are we don't know who they're going to be, but be open to those relationships. Great question.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question. Helen.
I'd like to ask, what are your needs right now? As you lead both organizations, what do you see as needs that need to be met? But what are the needs of your 2 organizations to meet those needs?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, you guys are so wise and profound. We could sit on this call all day Bishop, it's all good. But what I need people to do is, if you're Christian, be a good Christian. If you're Muslim, be a good Muslim. If you're Sikh, be a good Sikh. Honestly, it's really, as far as interfaith goes, we're surrounded by just amazing faith communities, faith leaders. And I know that people they say that, and I just have one of the best jobs in the world. I don't know if you can even call it a job sometimes, but it's just, as an organization, support Christ Church and no, Christ Church did not pay me to say any of that. I'm just saying that I really truly believe in the work that you all do, and come back and really, I'll say this, and what I see as sometimes what we don't do is the wisdom of the well doesn't reach the living water. And I see too many young people who need the wisdom of the well, and they're not finding it. They don't know how to get to it. Sometimes they feel, even I've worked in sexual assault counseling. I've worked with men who are getting out of prison or deferred prosecution agreements, probation, parole. You name the clientele, and I've probably worked with them from a trauma-informed place. And what I saw, and really what drives my life now, is I see them outside of a church. I see them outside of a masjid. I see them outside of a synagogue. I see them outside of a Sikh temple, a gurdwara. And they're hurt and they're damaged and they feel a sense of shame around it. And when they're looking at it and they're saying, and you want to almost walk to the side of them and say, hey, you should go inside. You should take a seat. You should go. And they're like, I can't, because I feel too much shame around this. And what I think that we all have to do is create a much more welcoming, understanding America. We have to create a more understanding, and I think that so if there's any way for you to do that, to make sure that you reach out to the people who feel like they don't belong in the church, and find them and help them.
Helen, you had your hand up for our last question. By the way, a lot of what we're hearing today is in the book that Arno and Pardeep wrote, The Gifts of Our Wounds. I highly recommend this book. It's just really great. Helen, you had a question, and then we're going to end.
Yes, very quickly. Well, thank you for bringing the deep well of Sikh religion to us this morning. That's been so interesting and so helpful. My question is this: to what extent was Gandhi influenced by Sikh teachings and Sikh precepts?
You're not going to want this answer, Helen.
Okay.
Gandhi and Sikhism. Well, I'll say it in this way. Gandhi, I want to say it in the best light possible, especially because I think that there's a lot of good things that Gandhi did do. Lots of Sikhs do not revere Gandhi. Lots of Sikhs actually despise Gandhi. And one of those reasons was when the partition was happening in India, he negotiated on behalf of certain communities, and he threw other communities under the bus. There was some very prolific leaders within the Sikh movement who were also asking for a separatist state, and were labeled as terrorists and separatists. Those people were up for crimes against India, and lots of people think that Gandhi could have intervened and helped. But part of the negotiation ship that he had with the British, with the empire, was that he threw some people under the bus, and those were Sikhs. And so lots of people think that Gandhi was a bit of a Hindu nationalist. And within India, Hinduism is the dominant faith religion, so much so that some people don't call it India. They actually call it something called Hindustan, the land of Hindus. And so I think it's tough. History is tough in those ways of, I think there's things that he did that merit him being a good person, but maybe not as much for six. And I think that can even be something that we can understand in the States, that I think there's a lot of people that we remember in history that might have been good for certain people, but were not good for other people. And I very much put Gandhi in that same category. There's a book by Isabel Wilkerson called Caste. If there's a chance that you all can read it, and not to promote another book, but she writes about Dr. King in the beginning of the book. And Dr. King, by this time, is a celebrated civil rights icon in the world. Him and Coretta go to India, and they stay in India for a month. They decide, we're going to stay, and we're going to learn from the teachings of Gandhi, because and Gandhi did revolutionize nonviolent protests. I mean, this is you can't take that credit away. He moved a lot of people to do that. And so with the baggage that comes with him, that's what he did. So we got to give him credit too. But so him and Coretta are in India, and they go to a high school in Kerala. Kerala is at like the southern tip of India. And as Dr. King is being introduced, the high school principal introduces Dr. King as another untouchable, not like a good untouchable, like as a lowest class untouchable. This is the civil rights leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he's an untouchable. And that is, and Isabel Wilkerson talks about how ingrained the caste system is in India. And she likens the caste system of there to like the caste system in Germany and the caste system in America. So she takes those three and she connects them and talks about like and then I think that was definitely Gandhi to an extent, is that Gandhi just didn't think about Sikhs as people, as he just kind of thought of them as, they're just in the way of progress of India. That's tough. That great question. I mean, that's something that I don't get to go into quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, this has been most informative. Pardeep, we are so grateful for spending this time with us today. And we look forward to our continuing relationship with you through your organizations and just as an individual. So God bless you, and God bless you all, and peace be with you.
Peace be with you all.
Yes.
Peace be with you all. God bless. Take care.
Take care. Thank you. And thank you, Ed.
My pleasure.
I know, I'm trying to find it.
You have to put a button down, yeah.